I don't know how much attention this has been getting around the world, but here in the UK, we've had a very significant story in the news lately, in the past couple of months, I would say, regarding Nigel Farage, and I think it has worldwide implications, so I want to talk about it for a bit. Nigel Farage is a renowned Conservative politician and social commentator here in the UK. He rose to prominence in the early 2000s, mainly because of his speeches in the EU Parliament, where he would rail against the lack of democracy and the globalist ambitions in that chamber. He didn't hold back, he would stand there. It was quite extraordinary to watch, actually, this one person standing in a room full of globalists, giving it to them with both barrels and not holding back.
The question that I want to ask, that we're all going to ask, is who are you? I'd never heard of you. Nobody in Europe had ever heard of you. I would like to ask you, President, who voted for you? And what mechanism? Oh, I know democracy is not popular with you lot. And what mechanism do the peoples of Europe have to remove you? Is this European democracy? Well, I sense, though, that you're competent and capable and dangerous, and I have no doubt that it's your intention to be the quiet assassin of European democracy and of the European nation states. You appear to have a loathing for the very concept of the existence of nation states.
Now I know that virtually none of you have ever done a proper job in your lives or worked in business, or worked in trade, or indeed ever created a job.
As you can see, he didn't hold back in his criticisms of the EU, and indeed he was eventually the main driving force behind Brexit, which happened in 2016. This is where the British people voted to reassert national sovereignty and to leave the European project. Now Nigel Farage uses his platform mainly on GB News to continue to speak against globalism, far-left authoritarianism, illegal immigration, woke ideology, and for free speech. So as you can imagine, then put all of that stuff together, and the far-left establishment utterly hates Nigel Farage because he stands in opposition to everything that they're trying to build. On the 29th of June, Farage revealed that his bank account with Coutts, which is a subsidiary of NatWest, was suddenly being closed for no reason whatsoever, or at least no reason that they would tell him. This came as something of a surprise to him because he'd been banking with them since the 1980s, but they insisted it was purely for commercial reasons. Essentially, Coutts is the prestige wing of NatWest. You need to have £3 million minimum savings in your account to use their services. And when Farage made this public on GB News and forced them to respond and give a reason, they simply said that Farage had fallen below that threshold. However, Farage suspected he was actually being shut down or debanked, as it's become known, by the establishment because of who he was and because of his conservative political views. He said that when he tried to find another bank, 9 other banks also refused to give him an account, which was very suspicious. Now, this caused a national uproar and an investigation began. It was raised in Parliament and people began asking, can this be true? That UK banks are shutting people out of society effectively merely for having the wrong opinions. Can this possibly be true? On the 4th of July, the BBC reported that they'd investigated the issue. They'd spoken to Dame Alison Rose, the chief executive of NatWest, and she had confirmed it was nothing to do with his political views. It was purely a commercial decision. The BBC, which is a very left-leaning organisation, gladly ran with this story with her version of events, and they began painting Farage in their reports as being something of a paranoid conspiracy theorist. John Sopel, who was a correspondent for the BBC, tweeted to mock Farage, saying, "You must feel a bit of a Charlie if you're Nigel Farage, and you claim that it's all an establishment stitch-up that your account's been closed when it's just that you're not rich enough for Coutts." Now, if they hoped that everyone would accept that version of events and the whole story would simply go away, then they were very much mistaken, because as the days passed, many others began to come to the fore to say, me too. I've been debanked and I have a suspicion that it's for the same reason. I have a suspicion that it's because of my conservative views, because indeed that was the thread that ran through all of these people. They all held conservative viewpoints. Those who funded the Brexit campaign had seen their accounts closed. Conservative politician Jeremy Hunt had been denied an account by Monzo. Yorkshire Bank closed the account of a vicar when he objected to pride flags and trans ideology. Metro Bank denied services to the gender-critical Our Duty group. First Direct cancelled Stuart Campbell's account when he started opposing trans ideology on his Wings Over Scotland blog. The Free Speech Union and the Trigonometry podcast podcast were also cancelled by their banks. Citizen Go, which is an anti-abortion charity, was cancelled by the Wise Bank. So as people started digging deeper into this, the full scale of the problem really began to become clear. It turned out that this has actually been going on for far longer and is far more widespread than anyone really feared. The number of accounts being closed in 2016 was 50,000 in the UK, but that's now risen to nearly 350,000, meaning that UK banks are closing around 1,000 accounts every single day. It's estimated that around 1 million accounts have been closed in the past 4 years. This is an epidemic where institutions that have been captured by far left ideology are now energetically, enthusiastically trying to seek out people with the wrong opinions and the wrong views so that they can close down their accounts, debank them, and shut them out of economic activity. And this is where I would like to raise my hand and say that I think I've been a part of this as well. If you've been following this channel for the past couple of years, you'll know that I moved house quite recently, about a year and a half ago, primarily driven by a desire to get a studio space where I could improve the Fuel Project content. For the first 9 years of the Fuel Project, I was living in a one-bedroomed maisonette and recording in this tiny little loft conversion. But a couple of years ago, I felt a prompt to try and find a better space to improve the level of the content. I tried to make videos, vlogs along the way to keep everyone in the loop. So if you're around a couple of years ago, then you'll likely remember the journey and the ups and downs of it and everything that happened. However, I don't think I've ever spoken about what happened financially towards the end of this process. I guess I've never really had any reason to talk about what happened financially, but there's a bit of a story here, so I'll just try and go through it briefly. What happened was I found a house, i.e. this one, that I thought would work really well because it had a garage conversion and I thought that would make a great studio space. So I made a bid on the house and I won the bid. As a standard practice, I was then asked to get my mortgage in place by the selling lawyer, solicitor, estate agent, whatever you want to call them. And that's what I did. I went online, tried to find the best rates. They were being offered by Nationwide Building Society, so I made an application with them. They ran a suitability test where I had to upload proof of income, tax returns. They ran a hard credit check, all this kind of stuff. And after that suitability test, they basically said, it's going to be fine. Don't worry about it. We just have to do some stuff on our end, but this is going to be fine. You easily pass our criteria. We'll get back to you in a few days. However, it kind of went silent on their end after that. The days turned into weeks. I kept contacting them every few days to see what was happening, to get an update. But whenever I did, they just kept fobbing me off, saying it would just be a few more days. I went into a local branch as well to try to speak to someone face to face, but they couldn't help me either. And after a few weeks of this, the sellers began to get impatient and they said, if you don't get your mortgage in place by the end of this week, we're going to put the house back on the market and you're going to lose it. And at that point, under that time pressure, I just gave up on Nationwide and I tried Halifax instead. I felt on safe ground with Halifax because I'd been with them for my old one-bedroomed house. I'd been with them for that entire 9 years. I'd never missed a payment, perfect credit score. They had my track record. I was a long-time customer. The amount I wanted to borrow in this house was actually less than the borrowing on the last house. So I felt that this was surely going to be okay. So I phoned them and said, look, I've got an emergency. I've been with you guys for 9 years, but I need a mortgage offer by the end of this week or I'm going to lose the house. So they were very helpful at first. I was given a personal mobile phone number of an assistant. I think she was called Melanie. So I had personal quick contact with her. She was very friendly and everything seemed like it was going to be okay. She did the suitability test over the phone and her response was, this is going to be absolutely fine. We'll have it done by tomorrow. We just have to do some things on our end, but don't worry about it. This is going to be okay. You'll get the house. I'm feeling at ease now. I'm feeling relaxed because it's Halifax. I've been with Halifax for 9 years. I know they're okay. I know they're good. The next day comes, however, and I get a message saying I'd been rejected. And even though it said on the message that I could phone with any queries, when I tried to call Melanie, she just ignored all of my calls. I just couldn't get through. I tried multiple times. I tried emailing because I was under a lot of time pressure. I was trying to get in contact. All ignored, all blanked. I just couldn't get through to them. They didn't want to speak to me. I actually went to a third bank, the bank that I'd banked with since I was about 12 years old, and they too cleared me on the suitability test, but then they wouldn't follow through with an actual offer. At the time, I thought this is suspicious. I wonder if what's happening was I was meeting the financial criteria for a mortgage, but then they were putting down the phone and they were researching the Fuel Project and what I actually talk about and get into on this channel. And when they discovered I was a Christian ministry with sometimes conservative viewpoints, That was the real reason I was being turned away. I was very suspicious of this. And this suspicion was heightened when Halifax said just a month or two later that if anyone disagreed with their stance on gender pronouns and trans ideology, they should close their account because they didn't want that business. So I was highly suspicious of this, and indeed the only reason I was able to secure this house in the end was because my sister stepped in to help. She had just sold her apartment and she had a chunk of money, so she could offer me a loan so I could buy this house without a mortgage, and then we could figure out how to get the money back to her later. So that's what happened. That's how it was done, and we did eventually manage to get the money back to her, but that's the only reason. Because of the banks, I was very nearly locked out of being able to buy a house, unable to put a roof over my head. I was nearly excluded from that whole aspect of society, and I'm pretty sure it's because of my Christian and conservative views. I've actually had a couple of people from New Zealand recently saying that they've been unable to send donations to the Fuel Project through PayPal in recent months as well. I don't know about other countries, I've not heard from anyone else from other countries, but for some reason people in New Zealand can't donate anymore through PayPal to the Fuel Project, and that hurts a small ministry like this. You know, £5, £10, that's a big deal when you're just one person by yourself. If it's a big thing, then it's okay, but £5, £10, that's a lot to a small ministry like this. Now, after all the initial denials that this debanking was happening in relation to Nigel Farage, Coutts were eventually forced to admit that actually he was dumped for his political views. The head of Coutts was forced to quit. Over the debacle, the BBC was forced to issue an apology for the way that it had reported on the issue initially. John Sopel sent an apology to Nigel Farage as well for his mocking tweet. So in other words, it's confirmed, the cat's out of the bag, there's no doubt about it, that this is happening. People are being denied a fundamental service because they're conservative or because they're Christian. Now, many will say, well, these are commercial organizations. They're within their rights to accept or refuse business, which is true. But banking is so integral to our lives now that if we can't bank, it's almost impossible to function in society. We can't have homes, we can't pay for our bills, we can't get jobs. And we're in a situation where the far left now realizes this power and are now actively trying to use banking institutions to exclude people from society in this way. If you don't think or say the right things according to the leftist establishment, you are now at risk of being cast out of society effectively. Now, others might say, well, just use cash. But it's becoming very difficult to function with cash now as well. And NatWest and other banks are on the verge of making it a whole lot more difficult. As of September, they're introducing stringent new limits on what you can actually do with cash in terms of deposits and withdrawals. And of course, all of this is designed to gradually push us towards central bank digital currency, or CBDC, and a fully cashless society. That is the eventual end game here. That's the goal of banks. All banks around the world are right now planning for and putting the infrastructure in place for a fully cashless society. That's the goal. Less of us are using notes and coins in our daily lives anyway. And one of the things that appeals to banks about CBDC is that it would allow them to completely monitor and control our spending and therefore effectively our lives. If you hand over physical cash to someone, no bank or government authority knows anything about that. But if you spend digitally, that transaction is passing through Visa or MasterCard or your bank, and they're able to see that transaction, log those transactions, and control those transactions, blocking them if they so choose. CBDC means banks and governments gain complete control over your spending. And again, that means they have control over your lives, where you go, what you do, what you spend your money on. So imagine a digital future, a completely digital future where you want to travel, but the government blocks it because they've given you a carbon limit and you've already gone over your carbon limit, so you just can't travel. Or imagine you want to buy food, but it gets blocked at the checkout because of what you wrote on social media last week. It sounds nightmarishly dystopian, but to some extent, that world is already here. Or at least it's beginning to show signs of being here. People are already being denied financial services because of their opinions and views. Like I say, if I was relying on banks, I probably wouldn't have a home right now. The Bible has been predicting this kind of world for thousands of years. It says that towards the end of time, an authoritarian one-world government will rise, and the ruler of it will require everyone, small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to be given a mark on the right hand or on the forehead, and no one could buy or sell anything without that mark, which was either the name of the beast or the number representing his name. Wisdom is needed here. Let the one with understanding solve the meaning of the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. His number is 666. This is one of the most famous passages in the Bible, and it predicts this kind of future. There's going to come a day under a globalized economy where everyone is going to have to take a mark, and they will buy or sell using that mark. And by the way, the technology for this already exists as well. And nobody will be able to buy or sell unless they fall in line with the dictates of that world government. Like I said, it sounds like a dystopia. And for the longest time, people have read that passage and not really been sure of how that could ever be implemented. But as of today, though, it's starting to become very, very clear. And it's starting to look like it's becoming very, very close.